Aging women are not valuable. That's the message the culture is sending. Of course, no one says it outright. That would be too crude, too impolite. So instead, it's communicated through all the little social cues, through who gets attention, who gets opportunities, who gets centered, and who gets quietly passed over. And you start to feel that in your own life. The compliments come less often, the interest shifts, the male gaze doesn't linger like it quite used to, and it makes you feel with every birthday that passes, you're losing more value. So you respond the only way that makes sense. Time feels like an army advancing, so you raise your defenses and try to hold the line. Skincare routines, workouts, maybe a little Botox, maybe a little something more. You do this not because you're vain, but because you're fighting for survival. And here's what makes this even more suffocating. The timeline has been pushed up. What once used to be a worry in your 40s now starts in your 20s. Gen Z celebrities are picked apart for aging badly before they've even finished growing into themselves. So much so that Millie Bobby Brown at 21 years old was told she looks 40. So what do you do in a world where aging has started to feel like a crime, where the natural evolution of a body is treated like a personal failure? To find answers, we invited Dr. Hillary McBride into the studio. Hillary is one of the leading psychologists working at the intersection of body image and aging, with years of clinical work sitting with women inside this exact pressure. She's one of the few people who can make sense of the full picture, what's happening culturally, how it's shaping us psychologically, and how to break free from it. If you're new to Mighty Pursuit, we exist to help you make sense of the whole person, mind, body, and spirit, not as vague wellness cliches, but as deeply interconnected parts of your everyday experience. And in today's episode, we zoom into body image and our culture's tendency to tie our worth to our appearance. This is one of the most comprehensive conversations you'll ever hear on the topic. We don't shy away from the parts that are uncomfortable or taboo. Hillary sees this moment with incredible precision, and what she suggests comes next deserves some serious attention. So let's begin. So Hillary, I wanted to start with a story you've seen up close in your practice. Obviously, you've worked with so many women. Can you take us into a moment where someone might have been affirmed or rewarded for how she looked? And then realized that the way she was being seen had changed, and what was happening in her life in that moment, and kind of what was that doing to her internally?
It's really hard to pick from the stories because there are so many and they all follow a similar trajectory, but I'll put some flesh on one of them. There's a woman I was seeing who was referred to me by one of her daughters who started to feel really concerned about her. She noticed that her mom was feeling more anxious, more rigid, and it was really getting in the way of this kind of like life that she wanted to live. And so the mom who's referred to me is in her 60s and she's coming into therapy and is quite visibly preoccupied with her appearance. I mean, right from the way that she sat down on the couch, right, managing kind of her posture and her clothes and kind of the angle that she's looking at me from. It was almost like, everything was about how it appeared as opposed to how it felt inside of her. And as we started getting into this work, what became clear, in addition to a history of childhood abuse, is that she had been adored for how she looked her whole life. I mean, right from the beginning of the time she was a kid, the things that a lot of girls and women hear, like, oh, you're so pretty, you're so cute, oh, you're the most beautiful in your class. In fact, often her parents would say to her things like, did anyone say anything good about how you look today? As she would come home from school. And so the story for her really had been most of her life, like, you're beautiful, and that is the most important thing about you.
Yeah.
And as she's aging, as happens for all of us, there starts to be this inner conflict for her around, my aging seems to be at war with this thing that has been so important to me. In fact, the thing that I have experienced is making me lovable and valuable and even safe in the world. And so as aging starts, so does the preoccupation with trying to manage the aging.
Yeah.
So she's like trying this procedure and she's thinking about this kind of cosmetic, endeavor. And then there's looking into a facelift. And then there's realizing the facelift that she wants is a little more expensive than she can pay for. So she's now working a second job and she's eating less at the family meals because she's trying to maintain her, her body size and image. And then she's, trying all sorts of medications for weight loss. And in her mind, like, these feel like really important, valuable things to be doing because they're helping her keep connected to the thing that's always made her important. But what was fascinating for her is that the people around her saw it so differently. Her grandkids were like, how come you don't want to get ice cream with me, Grandma? Her daughters are saying, like, how come like you're not wanting to come out for lunch for us on a birthday party, or you're not eating the cake, or you're, like you're so busy working these jobs to pay for your facelift that we don't see you anymore.
Yeah.
And so this tension starts to emerge for her around feeling like this thing is really important for me, but it's also slipping from my grasp. And I have to work harder and harder and harder to stay connected to it, right? Like she's like gripping this thing, her appearance, her image, her valuing of her body in that way. Meanwhile, aging is happening. It's feeling really threatening for her. And the people in her life are saying, but you're not living. And although this is a particular story about this one woman, the arc I see all the time in my work, that as we're aging, there's a conflict that emerges. And what are we going to do about it? Because society is saying one thing about who you are as a woman and your body. And yet maybe that thing that society is telling us is getting in the way, the kind of the existential thing that's underneath this. Like, am I living my life? And therein lies the tension that most women experience.
Yeah. As I listen to you tell that story, I can't help but think that that is the reality for some, if not most, the majority of women living in 2026. There was this moment in the fall that really struck out to me. I saw this video from Holly Berry, and she spoke at the New York Times Deal Book Summit. And what she said there was very, very pointed, and it was very specific. I wanted to read you the quote because I thought it was very, very on point. She said, "Women of my age are simply devalued. Our culture thinks that at 59 years old, I am past my prime, and the women my age start to become invisible. In Hollywood, in the workplace, on social media, women are pressured to stay forever 35. We're complimented if we seem to be aging backwards or defying gravity, as if that's even possible. And if we somehow manage to look younger than our years, we're suggested that that's the gold standard that our worth should be measured by. We're encouraged to contort our bodies and our faces in truly extreme ways to chase this elusive fountain of youth. And sadly, I have to admit, I too feel this pressure every single day. I feel that pressure to change myself in order to stay seen, relevant, and desirable. But the question is, for whom?" So as you hear that, what immediately stands out at you? Words, phrases, sentiments?
What stands out to me is the way that our society has constructed the ideal woman, the ideal woman's body to be youthful, to be thin, to be always aging backwards, in a sense. It's kind of like the conflict with what nature is trying to do. It seems like we're trying to push women in the opposite direction. And doing so equates to social power, safety, love, a sense of being valuable, being visible. I mean, there's the pressures that all of us are experiencing in Western culture. And then there's, of course, the pressure that she's facing in the public eye, that there's even more scrutiny for women whose bodies have been this tool for selling films, for selling stories, for making money for other people, that there's even more pressure when a woman's worth financially and her career and her passion have been tied to her body looking in alignment with a cultural ideal that just doesn't cooperate with nature.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems like some of these rules don't seem to be made explicit. It's like rarely do you hear someone come out and be like, well, if you're an aging woman, you're worthless. But it's like, it feels like through little social cues and other ways that's kind of like communicated, and it dictates so much of what's happening, and you notice. And so what do you think are some of the social cues and ways people internalize that this is the way that things work, even if someone's not explicitly saying like, I'm not hiring you for this job because you're 58 now and you're not attractive.
Right. Yeah.
So
yeah. Well, there's all sorts of ways that this is internalized. And what we know, like what I'm coming back to in my mind, is the theory that we have about how messages about bodies are communicated. They're often spread through media. So we see the subtle things in what we're looking at all the time. And the not so subtle things like fight aging with this cream literally says like aging is something that's dangerous, that you need to be in a conflict with, that you need to fight, that you need to have a battle with. But the kinds of media that we're exposed to and how and how it seems that women who are aging disappear. They just poof, are kind of gone. Or I love the thing that Kate Winslet is trying to do with her commentary on aging, saying, this is what an aging woman's face looks like. You might not see it very often. It's just how it actually looks. So we have the kind of explicit messages in media, and then the implicit messages that have to do with kind of where are the aging women? We just don't really see them anymore. And all of that shapes the way that we are thinking about ourselves, thinking about what's important, thinking about what is ideal, the standard that we're supposed to be achieving. And then, of course, there's the whole other element of it too, which is family conversations and the communication about aging that we're hearing from older family members. Like sometimes people might hear an older family member say things like, don't get old, it's horrible, right? Or don't, like, oh, I had someone say to me recently, moisturize your neck, Hillary, moisturize your neck. You're going to be thanking me in 20 years from now, right? And there's all sorts of subtle communication in that about like how she's feeling about aging and what I'm going to be afraid will happen in 20 years from now. And then we have peers, like the kinds of things that our friends are talking about and the kinds of things that they're saying we do. And this is how you belong. And it's so easy to get swept up into those things as a way of feeling like we're part of a conversation and we're not left out. And as sophisticated as we might think we are as adults, all of us probably feel on some level like we're 13 inside and just want to belong. And if our friends are saying, hey, this is what I'm doing, to resist that or to kind of push back or critique it in some way might threaten relationships. And so it's easier to just go along to get along.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. I mean, I think one thing I'm thinking about is the celebration. In her quote, she talked about the celebration of people who, quote unquote, do defy aging. And so if you see a celebrity or someone who's 55 or a public figure, and all of a sudden they look like 42, it's like this accomplishment. And so what do you think that is doing to us? Like, it's not bad that somebody might look younger, right? Mm-hmm. If they're 55 years old, but it's almost like that's the standard we should be shooting for.
Yeah, so it creates the standard, as you're saying, but then it also does something about the opposite. Kind of the implicit message in there is that this is something that we are rewarding socially. You get praised, you get celebrated, you get reinforced. And what happens if you look older than you are? Right? The subtlety in the communication in there is that looking old or older, aside from maybe when you're 12, I remember being 12 and thinking, I look 14, right? And there's something about feeling like, oh, I have a little more power. I'm not a kid anymore, right? Like I'm growing up. But at some point that switches and we start to tell the story about aging, that it's a bad thing. And there's almost like a moral quality to it, right? There's something about like, kind of, we do this to fat people as well. We say, if you look older than you are, something has gone really wrong in your life. Or if you look older than you are, or you look your age even, you haven't been taking care of yourself. You haven't been investing in your appearance like you actually care about who you are and care about how you think about yourself. So, or what other people think about you. So we see that in the celebration of the defying of age, the opposite of it also is like embedded in that communication that you really should be trying to do this, because if you're not, you've let yourself go.
Yeah. I mean, I'm curious what you think. Like, how do you feel like this reality differs for men than women?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is a gendered narrative for sure. And I'm thinking about your question in terms of two angles. The first one is that we have the societal narratives. These are the overculture, the metaculture things that impact all of us at the level of media and our social values and even our political values as a culture. And then there's the personal. So I'll talk about the metaculture for a moment. It is a gendered phenomena to suggest that aging is a bad thing that you need to prevent. Of course, like there's often in there, there's like a thing that is happening, I think, with the rise of social media, that more men are caring about their image than have before. But generally, the trend still exists that women are exposed to pressures around aging that men just aren't. Men are celebrated for aging, for their accomplishment. it would be unsurprising, perhaps, for us to see an older man with a younger woman in a relationship. Yeah. And we all maybe would have assumptions about why that is and what that means about his success and status. But it wouldn't be seen as such a confusing thing. So we know that men are exposed to different ideals about what it means to age and are often celebrated for their aging and for their accomplishment and their financial status and whatnot, whereas women are forced into this very narrow ideal that keeps us infantilized, that keeps us restricted, constrained to the ideal about our bodies that just doesn't, it doesn't work. It doesn't, it keeps us small as a person, existentially, in terms of our creative pursuits, in terms of how we feel about our lives. But then so that's kind of the meta culture piece. But then there's the individual thing, which is that some men might experience more distress as they're aging. And regardless of what culture says, depending on what they're exposed to, their peer group, their health concerns, there might be, more fear for them than the average person, because maybe all of their friends are getting plugs and they're losing their hair. Or maybe they're realizing that they can't quite keep up the youthful appearance that some of their friends are because of a health treatment or an aesthetic treatment for, that maybe they can't afford or doesn't work for them. So it really depends on not just what are the gendered narratives that we're exposed to, but also what kind of media are we engaging with? What have we been told? What's the standard that's been set for us by the people that we're interacting with on a day-to-day basis? And so it's possible for our culture to say, hey, men have it easier as they're aging, but also some men to feel like, oh, yeah, but not me.
Yeah. I could relate to that at some level. I mean, I'm 36 now and, so 40s in like 4 years. And so at some level, it's like you as a man, you're internalizing that. But I do think that I can recognize that the meta narratives do seem deeply unfair at some level, right? I mean, we're told that, let's just say you're a man, right? And you're married or whatever, and then you get divorced or whatever, and you're, I don't know, in your 40s, and these like silver fox narratives, right? So like you could be called a silver fox as like a 50-year-old man, but if you go gray as a woman in like your 40s, it's like this strange thing in our society. And then I think on the dating scene as well, is the thing that pops up for me is like, it's more socially accepted that a 50-something-year-old man would date a 30-something-year-old woman than any sort of reverse age gaps. And so even when it comes to the ability for a man to be like, oh, I'm going to start over and I'm going to have a family when I'm like 50-something years old. So there's a lot of things that simply feel like they don't exist for women, or way more challenging for women than they would be for a man. So even though I feel, on, like you said, on a personal level, like, oh, the realities of aging are hitting me, I can sense that in some ways I'm a little bit more privileged in the conversation than would be for a woman. So.
Yeah. And we can't have the conversation about this discrepancy in the gendered narratives without pointing to a patriarchal culture, a misogynistic culture, which has said men have inherent worth, and their worth has to do with their intellect and their achievements and what they contribute to society, and then their kind of just their imbued power, whereas women don't have as much power, but can sort of claw some of it back through what they do for other people, or really through how their object bodies are treated. So it's impossible to have this conversation without acknowledging the incredible disparity in the way that our culture treats women, and has said, you don't matter except for these very particular things, which can kind of help you play the power game just for a little bit.
It's interesting. You've talked about your work with mothers and daughters. And so it seems like sometimes we like adopt these narratives for ourselves, and then we pass that down through unspoken code. So can you talk a little bit about that and how you've seen it enforced even in close relationship type dynamics?
I was shocked to learn at the beginning of my research that one of the most significant predictors of how young people feel about their bodies is how their moms felt about their bodies. And yet, we could say there's obviously more influences than that, but the people that we spend the most time with, the people who are talking about themselves, who are shaping our world, shape our unconscious biases about ourselves, about bodies, about other people's bodies. So it was fascinating for me to learn that primarily if moms struggle with their bodies and their body image, that their kids are likely to as well. And what my research found, and this, again, felt really surprising, is that there are things that parents can do explicitly, mothers in particular, to protect their kids from body image struggles, but they have to take a stand. They have to intentionally want to pass something different on than they learned. And it's really hard to take a stand around something and intentionally try to shift a narrative that you don't even know that you're swimming in. And so for a parent to say to the next generation, this is what you're exposed to, and I want to inoculate you against it, means that parents have to be aware of the social discourse. They have to be conscious to what the implicit messages are in our beauty ads, in our social media, in the products that we see that our friends want, and the trends about how you hold your body and the way you take a picture and what filter you use. And parents have to be aware of that sort of thing to protect their kids, but they can. And what's fascinating when they do is that it's actually liberating in both directions. And so the finding from my research that I think most people find to be hopeful and empowering is that when we take this stand to protect not only our children, but the next generation, when we say, hey, I can see something from up here that's hurting us, and I want to tell you about it. And here's what we're going to do to protect you from that. And not to shield you and send you off into this kind of like, everything is bubble wrapped land, but I'm going to equip you to know how to respond to these things. That not only is it good for the next generation, but it's actually good for the people who are protecting the next generation. And the phenomena that the language I give to this phenomena is to give them a ladder. And the idea is that you're saying, okay, I'm going to steady the ladder at the bottom, and I want you to be able to reach up higher than the constricted, constrained, dehumanized version of humanity that I was given access to. But what we find that often happens is that when we spend time liberating the next generation of people, that when they're at the top of the ladder, like reaching up higher than we ever could, they often look back and say, hey, come join me up here. This is so much better than the world that you were given access to. And so we participate in each other's liberation all the time. But again, it's really hard to do that when we are caught up in the story of just trying to manage our bodies or just trying to play along with the story that we were told about how to be good and lovable that maybe we learned as kids. And we're just kind of on that hamster wheel.
Yeah, I mean, the social cues with the mothers and daughters, obviously you've been on this podcast before, I thought was interesting because simply watching how your mother observes herself through the mirror or how she talks about her own body seems to have profound subconscious effect. Yeah, and not just subconscious, but actually conscious. Okay, so this is like kind of mind-blowing stuff that for me felt like, we're all experiencing this. How come no one's talking about it? So in the research, what I did was I looked at these two groups of women. We had mothers in one group, daughters in one group. And of course, they were related, right? So we had the daughters of the mothers being interviewed, the mothers of the daughters being interviewed. And I asked all of them, tell me about what you learned about your bodies growing up. Tell me about the kinds of things that you feel about your body. How did you come to know that about your body? What influenced that? When has it been hard? What's been protective? What do you now love about your body? How do you negotiate struggles around your body? All sorts of things. But I asked the mothers in particular to tell me about what it is that they told their daughters about their bodies. And the mothers were, so proud. They said things like, oh, I told my daughter her body was beautiful and she didn't have to worry what anyone thought. And, oh, it's like, don't worry about the stories out there. Like, you're perfect as you are. And they felt like they'd done a really good job with this and had been explicit and implicit in communicating, love yourself. Yeah. You're good as you are. Now, the big shocker reveal, which, now for me as a mother is like, whew, feels like an important message to hear, is that I asked the daughters, tell me what your mom said to you about your body. They were like, not much, right? Couldn't recall anything specific that they were actually told out loud, right? The explicit things. But they said, but I can tell you how many times I watched her stand in front of a mirror and adjust her jeans or like complain nothing fit or feel like, she's picking at how her body, her skin rolls over the top of her pants. And I remember that shaping something for me growing up, that
oh, this is part of being a woman is feeling unhappy about your body, feeling dissatisfied with how you look, and spending your life trying to manage it. So the discrepancy is that we're thinking that we're being explicit about these really positive messages as we're parenting, but kids are paying way more attention to what it is that we're doing. And that can feel kind of scary because sometimes we're passing things on that we don't even know that we're passing things on, but also creates a really compelling narrative that when you are a parent, how you are in relationship with yourself and your ability to do the work to come to terms with the messages you've internalized and how you live them is a really important part of liberating not only yourself, but all the little eyes that are watching.
Yeah, it's interesting because, you mentioned the patriarchal society thing earlier. And so if these kind of implicit rules are kind of set in the messages that we communicate to women about their bodies, it seems like the byproduct of that is women internalizing that so much that they start enforcing the rules themselves, and they might not even know that they're doing that. And so, I mean, if you just look at online threads and stuff like that, some of the most critical people towards other women are women.
Absolutely.
And so, especially when it comes to aging and stuff like that. And I wonder, so the pressure isn't necessarily coming outside, but it's almost like these sort of oppressive messages about self-worth then go into they become so internalized. And so what does that internal voice sound like to live with that internal voice as a woman or an aging woman, the chatter that's like going on in your brain?
Well, it has a particular quality to it. It's not neutral. It's not the observational, distant mindfulness voice that maybe we wish it was. A lot of the times it's a really critical, sharp, cutting voice that's constantly comparing our body to somebody else's body, to the standard, to what it should look like, to what it used to look like, right? The comparison that women experience, not just to other women, but also to younger versions of themselves, is profound. I mean, the sharpness and the edginess and the ruthlessness of those voices inside are constantly noticing, pointing out, criticizing, belittling for all the things that are wrong. And we might, depending on our own personal story, have particular areas of our body or parts of how we look that are more likely to be a magnet for that voice. And there are all sorts of reasons for that. When you take that to that extreme, it could be, body dysmorphia disorder. There could be all sorts of really acute mental health conditions that go along with that. But the voices generally are not neutral and observational. They tend to be mean. And they're there for a reason, right? They develop as a means of keeping us in alignment with a thing that we think that we need in order to survive. Although it's kind of like a funny way to twist our perception of those voices, the psychologist in me says, I think that those are there because we've needed them to feel like it's the only way to stay safe. I don't think that a human mind begins to attack itself for any other reason than to try to adapt in a society that says, this is how you have to belong. This is the kind of thing that you need in order to be a part of the tribe that's going to keep you
survival.
Safe. Absolutely. Yeah.
So, I mean, in terms of the actual content, like first person narratives, if we're trying to help people like become aware of that internal voice, because a lot of it just feels like so quick, chatter, intrusive. What are like some of the specific thoughts maybe that someone might have or comparisons?
Yeah. Well, there's the thoughts, and I can give you some examples of that. But when it becomes so normalized in our system, we might not even think it. We might just have all sorts of behaviors that we have adopted to manage not having those thoughts. So I'll give you an example of that. With the thinking, a person might say, oh, God, I'm so fat. Right. Oh, I've gained weight. It's such a problem. Oh, look at this. Someone's going to see. Oh, I saw that picture. Oh, right. It doesn't look so good. Oh my gosh, you can see my body. There's like this kind of monitoring and criticism about, let's just maybe say size or shape or like skin looseness or wrinkles, whatever the thing is. But then there's the things that the people do to try to prevent those thoughts from coming up, which might be part of this elaborate routine that we have to get away from feeling that distress. So the people who measure their food out or pose in certain angles so they don't ever have to be exposed to that thought of like, oh, I don't look good from that angle. The management strategy of that is like, always look at your body from an outside perspective as if you're observing yourself. See yourself through the eyes of the male gaze or the camera's gaze or whatever gaze, and hold yourself in a certain way. And then you never have to have those thoughts about yourself. So there can be the cutting, erosive chatter that has us feeling like, oh, I'm so ugly, I'm so fat, or I'm so old, or this isn't right, that kind of stuff. But then there's also all the things that we do to not have to think those thoughts, which people might not even know. Like there's a story that I tell in one of my books about a woman who comes in and says, like, look at this picture of me when I was more thin. Look at this picture. Wasn't she beautiful? And she has this whole story about how she's been managing her appearance to not have to feel that feeling inside that the shame, really. Like the voice of shame will often have, you're ugly, you're fat, you're old, you're useless, you're not lovable, like those kinds of qualities to them. But the shame feeling is what's underneath. And so she developed this whole strategy around looking at this younger version of herself in a photo as a motivational strategy to avoid eating things that she thought were going to cause her to gain weight. So she would get up in the morning, she would look at these images, and they would be this kind of like inspiration. They would be the strategy. If you remember that you could have that once, you could have it again. And as long as she looked at those photos and she felt like, I can do this, I can rally, then she wouldn't have to feel the fear and the shame that came from eating things that caused her body to change. And so she didn't necessarily walk in saying, I hate my body. She walked in saying, look at this beautiful photo of me. So like our minds can be really tricky in how they distort and shift our management strategies.
Yeah, that's really interesting because it's almost framed as when you tell that, it's almost there's a unconscious thing where it's like it's just so normal. We don't see anything wrong with that. Yeah. It's just like the most normal thing that we would say that.
Yeah. Yeah. And people do that all the time in therapy. They bring in these like really interesting kind of distortions of reality and of themselves. Like, oh, you think I'm old and ugly, don't you? Meanwhile, like I've never had that thought in my life about this person sitting in front of me, or the person will say like, oh, you're judging me right now. Like we have these projections that we hold about ourselves and we assume other people hold them too. And so this is just kind of like how the world is. And this is just normal for us. And then it takes being exposing those inner thoughts to someone who thinks differently for us to start realizing, wait, not everybody is thinking this about me. When it's just the normative story in our minds, it can feel like, oh, that is reality.
Yeah. It seems like the pressure, I mean, the word that comes to mind for me is surveillance, surveillance of one's body, and the pressure for it to look a certain way from every single angle. And so like you take your face, what's the side profile, what's the jaw, like what's your nose, and like what do your eyes look like, and then even your body, like what's your bust and your butt, and how does that look like from the side, and constantly thinking about all of those different dynamics. And then what really struck me is when you said like the behaviors, that automatic behaviors that have become so normal that it's not like we're thinking, oh, that person is looking at me right now, let me do this thing. It's almost like we just do the thing. We never stand in a certain way, or with clients that you worked at, what is the end game of that? If someone's constantly watching, evaluating, managing their appearance, what is their life like?
Yeah, there's a few different ways to answer that question. The first is that there's obviously a mental health outcome connected to it. We feel more anxious. We feel more rigid. We feel more preoccupied, maybe controlling of our behaviors. And then, of course, the flip side of that is more scared of what happens when we can't control, or when things happen outside of our ability to manage our appearance or how we're perceived. What we know is that the closer you are to an appearance ideal as it's constructed socially, the more anxious you are about losing it. we have this story that we think, if you look a certain way, you're going to be finally free from the pressure of feeling like you have to beat your body into submission because you've got it, you have attained the goal. And yet the research data shows us that that's actually not the case, that when you look the way that everybody wants you or expects you to look, all you have is further to fall. All you have is more to lose, to become, aging like the rest of us, or body softening or losing ability like everybody else. So there's the mental health outcome piece and then the distress around it. But I think the other piece that we have to talk about more is it costs us our experience of being alive. Like when we're moving all of this energy towards managing how we look and living in surveillance, we're imprisoned. We're imprisoned in a way of behaving and thinking that doesn't have us thinking for ourselves, that doesn't have us embodying our reality. There's no concern about if I like this food or if it tastes good or if I feel connection to my sensuality. We're thinking about how do I manage everybody else's perception of how I look just to stay safe. Like it reminds me of this thing that we talk about in affective neuroscience, or when we think about trauma responses, like the freeze response. Do nothing, don't breathe, don't act, don't say anything, because the only way to stay safe is to not really live, to not make a noise, to not exhale and let your body be soft. So I think we lose, like what it costs us on a deep level is our ability to feel alive and to be ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, I love what you're saying about the whole idea of it being a destination, because, I mean, we do kind of think about it like that way. It's kind of like an illusion, but we think about it like, okay, I'm going to make these changes and then everything's going to be better. But if you go back to the example of Halle Berry, I mean, this is a person who, as a millennial growing up, she was like depicted as like the picture of beauty, sex symbol on all these, like number one on all these lists of like most beautiful people in the world. And, now she's 59 years old. And so it's like, you can't hold on to it. You couldn't even hold on to that forever. The only place that you could go from is, if you want to buy the culture's world, is down from being depicted in that way and celebrated in such a way. And then for her to be saying that same thing at the end of the day, which in some ways might even be a little bit more, could be more piercing than the average person. Like if that was your whole identity, or if that was the sum of your worth, and you've quote unquote attained this cultural standard, and now that's just like completely gone away because time is just going on. And so, when someone notices signs of aging, we've been talking about it from like a general body image thing, but is there a unique about the self-talk and the internal voice of like a wrinkle starts popping up and a gray hair? Like, what is the internal dialogue start to become there specifically with aging?
Yeah. Well, one, it depends on your attitudes towards aging. What we're talking about is this large scale social narrative that says aging needs to be fought, it needs to be controlled, it needs to be feared, which really is out there. And it is possible for us to hold different ideas. So there might be some people who go, oof, whoa, didn't think that was good. I like, what? I'm 30 and I got a gray hair. Oh, I'm going to pluck that out. Or like, oh, better go get my dye job done. And then there might be other people who go, oh, whoa, right. Maybe some surprise, maybe some curiosity. So again, our personal attitudes towards aging, as they've been shaped by our relationships, by our ability to think critically, play a large role in this. But it is possible for it to create a massive fear response for people. Like, oh, I have to be back to the surveillance. I have to be monitoring this now. And I need to get, spur into action. I need to be doing something to take on the fight against this thing that is coming for me. And my days of eating whatever I want and staying up however I want and not thinking about protein or not thinking about facial treatments or creams, those days are over. And this is the sign, based on what I've been taught to believe culturally, that it's time to start acting in a way that I haven't. Now, mind you, there are people who are so preoccupied with anti-aging that even before there are signs of it, like we could say in the prime of their youth, are preoccupied with preventing and managing aging. More and more, we're seeing younger and younger women using treatments, facial treatments, using aesthetic treatments,
Botox.
Products, of course, right? Injectables. as a way of preventing any sign of aging before it even comes up, to the point that they're so fixated on the micro movements of skin and, what it really means to live and have a body that reflects living, that we're trying to keep ourselves in these like cryogenically frozen bodies that defy any sign of living whatsoever. But it is like the pressures are real. And so there are some people who will find that even before there are signs of aging, that they're actively working to prevent it from happening.
So what is, like, if this is unconscious or it's in our behaviors, what sort of meaning gets attached to that? Like what meaning are we attaching to a gray hair starts to come in? If I just let it go, if I'm not going to do anything about it, what's the meaning there?
What's the meaning if we're able to allow it to let go?
Yeah, if we just let it go, like what a meaning are we attaching, or what narrative are we attaching if we just let it go?
Yeah, well, the culture might say you're letting your entire self go, that your entire existence and your value is letting go. So there can be this incredible motivation to care and to care deeply, because it's seen that one thing, if we let that one thing go, well, maybe we can let one thing go, but can we let two things go? Can we let three things go? Can we let an increasing awareness of our body shifting go? Well, I think what it signals for people is this complete loss of control of their body, in the way that we are, as an appearance, moving towards something we've been told socially means that you're irrelevant, that you don't exist, that you are effectively going to disappear. There is the other side of it too, which is maybe the meaning we're attaching to that is, oh, this is what bodies do. We're like, okay, a gray hair. Yeah, I anticipated this would happen. Great. Oh, I wonder when more will come up. Or yes, I have had a stressful year. and the things that I've been through do actually change my body composition. So there's options there, but I think there's a heavy pressure in our culture to attribute a high degree of meaning to that as a thing that is threatening to our value, our security, our safety, our worth.
What I hear from a lot of people is this idea of, I'm doing things for myself, right? So if I dye my hair, it makes me feel good, I'm doing it for myself, or I get some sort of cosmetic surgery. Do you truly believe that to be the case sometimes? Or do you feel like it's always with the mind of like the observer coming in and how we're going to be perceived?
Yeah, we're tricky as humans, aren't we? Because we can convince ourselves things are for ourselves and put in the basement of our consciousness all of the data, all of the relational experiences, all of the emotion, all of the unconscious messages and the explicit messages that have told us this is how you do things to be loved. And it is a very, very powerful thing for us as a human species to want to belong and be loved. It's essential for our survival, for our not just survival, but our thriving. And so it's tricky for us, right? Because we can actually tell ourselves this is what we want, and also what we want be deeply shaped by the water that we're swimming in, to the point that we buy in because it's our way of feeling like we have some power when things have otherwise felt powerless. I mean, there's like fascinating research when you think about cognitive science. Let's just take this out of the realm of body image and aging for a moment to talk about decision making. That what we see in terms of how the brain actually works is that people are more likely to make a decision based on unconscious reasons, and then put a story on top of that that explains why they made the decision, to reduce this kind of cognitive dissonance or reduce the discomfort around the not knowing. So classic experiments, you have someone pick out a poster, like from two posters that they are virtually, identical. And then you ask them to explain, why did you like the poster? And based on how the studies are constructed and what's happening, there was no reason that people had to pick one from the other. But they come up with these very convincing stories after the fact, like, well, I picked this one because I really like the red in this one, or I like this one because I like the typeface or the font, or, it's going to look better in my home. And so what the research about cognition shows us is that whenever we're doing something to try to kind of make sense of what otherwise feels scary and unexplainable for us, we often put a story on top of it that has a lot more to do with choice than is actually shaping why we're making the decisions that we're making.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think one of the most interesting stories that is placed on top is this idea of like responsibility. And so it's almost this flipping and giving ourselves away to the cultural narratives as it's like a form of discipline. And so like when you notice those things, it's like, no, you take care of them, and that's like the responsible thing to do. In your book, you wrote that we learn to objectify ourselves as if it was our moral duty to do so. And so it's almost like we're throwing up our hands. This is just how it is. So we should treat aging and appearance as problems to solve. And that's the most responsible thing to do. And that's actually discipline. And so what do you make sense of? How do you make sense of that shift where we're playing the game starts to feel like a sense of discipline instead of like resignation?
You're right. Yeah. Well, it's what's woven into this. I mean, I'm so glad you brought in the moral angle, is that we have become convinced that caring about our appearance is good and makes us good. And again, there's this whole motivation underneath that, which is about the social components. Like, what have we been taught? What has allowed us to feel safe? What kind of keeps the distress inside of us about being out of control in our lives down? And this, I mean, the background to this conversation that we haven't brought in here yet, but feels like, I mean, based on my work, is glaring here, is how scary it is to die, how scary it is to anticipate death, and how so much of our fear of aging is around trying to hold on to what allows us to feel like we have youthfulness, like death is further away, like being out of control, being not just dead socially, or dead, like losing our social credibility or having a loss around our social value, but quite literally losing our aliveness. That so much of us are under the assumption that our preoccupation with aging is about caring for our appearance and treating ourselves well, when a lot of times I think it's a death anxiety strategy. It's a defense against the fact that life is going to take the course it's going to take. And that's something huge for us to grapple with.
Yeah, I mean, I've had those thoughts recently, for sure. I mean, I think it's this. It's kind of like where did time go? I mean, objectively, if you think about it, 36 years old, I'm not 80, right? So it's like I'm not like truly in the twilight years of my life. But if I think about when I was 25, I like that wasn't a narrative that was going on. I wasn't thinking about, 40s in 4 years. It was like, you feel like you have so much time.
Yeah.
And so I think that you're hitting on something there of, okay, I'm getting older. The risk that I would develop a disease is increasing. The potential I might even have in life, apart even from appearance, but you go to college, the world's ahead of you.
Yes, everything's about to happen.
Yeah. And then you're 36 and you're not necessarily where you need to be. And so then maybe the appearance thing could actually be a way to try to turn back the clock, to look at yourself in the mirror and be like, no, I get a redo.
Yeah, there's still time. There's still time. Let me tell you, like from an existential perspective, it is way easier for people to get Botox. It is way easier to take a GLP-1. It is way easier for people to buy a cream than it is to look at the fact that we're going to die, that they were taught from an early age that their value is conditional by people who were actually supposed to treat them otherwise, and that we're in a misogynistic patriarchal culture, which treats us like objects. Deconstructing those things, like what I was taught to believe and what our society says, and this like inevitable pathway to our mortality, like those are very, very painful things to look at. They create a lot of distress. They feel really threatening. And there aren't a lot of places where we can do that and have people sit with us in the grief of them, like the real human existential grief. And so we buy a product and it helps us feel better for a while, right? And we like get preoccupied with a filter, or we survey ourselves from the outside because it allows us to claw back a sense of agency when there is so much that is out of control in our lives.
What's interesting is I don't know if this was the case in like the 1980s or 1990s, but the timelines on these sorts of thoughts and experiences seem to be pushed up significantly. I mean, I came across a story It's probably like 10 months ago, but Millie Bobby Brown, she's in Stranger Things. She's just 21 years old. And so obviously people watched her grow up as like a 10-year-old on television, and now she's 21. But anyway, she changed her hair, and it was blonde now, in style. And the backlash to something like that was brutal. And so she was mocked and bullied online for looking old. And one article was even titled, "Why Are Gen Zers Like Millie Bobby Brown Aging So Badly?" And then so she said, for some reason, people can't seem to grow up with me. Instead, they act like I'm supposed to say frozen in time. And because I don't, I'm now a target. And she admitted that experience made her cry for several days on end. And so I think it's interesting that what used to be maybe a conversation you're thinking about in your 50s is now not only in your 30s, but now you're potentially even being surveilled by your peers on how you're aging in your 20s. I think one of the most interesting things that ties into what you were saying about death and, you know, how much time we have left on Earth is with her story. That's interesting is that, you know, that show just ended, and, you know, people associate it with their youth. And so in some ways, watching someone's appearance completely change that looked like they were 10 years old, it's almost like we've become uncomfortable with even seasons of life, to go from high school to college to being an adult. Mm-hmm. And we don't have a framework almost for how to deal with those things. And her story was just one example of this. I mean, I think about, there's all these kind of AI nostalgia pages that are popping up on social media where now they recreate footage from the 90s or the 2000s of how good was it back then.
Right.
And then in the NFL, Philip Rivers was a quarterback, just came back at 44 years old after not playing for 5 years, which was like completely unprecedented. But you would see this hardcore rooting for him to succeed and quote unquote like beat Father Time. And so what I see like interwoven with these things is our inability to deal with seasons, and then also the grieving of that. And so you're watching this person who's like was 10 years old, and now they're 21, and 10 years has just passed. And so to comment on our thing and be like, no, you need to stay frozen in time is like, you know?
Well, it's a reflection of our desire to stay frozen in time. Like if she's aging, then it means we are too. If she's aging badly, and that's the story that we're hearing, allegedly, what does that mean about us if we don't have access to all the things that she does? There's this really interesting theory, because we're talking about death, that it's called terror management theory. And the first person to kind of bring it into the discourse was Ernest Becker. He wrote this Pulitzer Prize-winning book called The Denial of Death. And the idea with terror management theory is that we are constantly experiencing terror of our own death. And so we come up with all of these very strategic cultural ways to kind of keep it at bay. We can kind of keep it behind our, in our unconscious if we play the rules that culture tells us to play. And if we get really, really good at the rules that culture tells us to play, then we can forget about the fact that we're dying. And so there's all sorts of rules that culture tells us to play around wealth and success, but one of them here is around body and image. And I think that these things are intimately tied together. If we can get really, really good at what culture says is ideal, which in the case of women is thin and often light-skinned and has this youthful appearance where you're within this particular age demographic where you like maybe have some maturity and you're not a child, but you aren't showing any signs that your body is actively aging, that we're in this window of getting to win at what culture says that we need to win at in order to keep all of our anxiety and our terror of death at bay. And so when we come back to that question you asked earlier about like seeing the gray hair or seeing the wrinkle, or our body starts changing, or maybe for women, they're noticing indicators of perimenopause, like all of a sudden it can feel really stressful, not just because we're losing what culture tells us is valuable, because it brings this whole other existential thing into our awareness that we have been actively working to keep away.
Yeah, I can't. The word that pops up for me is like, if we're going to like win at this game, for example, I think it seems like evidence of our own powerlessness,
Mm-hmm.
that truly internalizing the narrative that we can't think about the world any other way, or the world isn't going to be any other way. And we talked offline a little bit about the whole Gen Z phenomenon that's emerging, the Looksmaxxing thing. And, the BBC covered this, and they defined Looksmaxxing as becoming the most attractive one can possibly look according to a set of prescribed criteria. And so it's almost like from our youth, we're internalizing that this is the only way. This is the way that society works, and it's going to alter your opportunities. It's going to alter the way that people see you. It's going to alter your dating prospects. And so we might as well just try to win at life. I win at it because there's no other way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, or maybe previously people would have said, okay, the way you win at life is you get a bunch of money and you put your name on a building, or you start a foundation, or you come up with you write a Pulitzer Prize winning book, or you do something that has nothing to do with your image. Maybe it has to do with how much social media has taken over our lives and the way that our image-based culture reinforces that that's actually the most important reality. It's kind of what we're exposed to all the time, that the values that we have around what matters in life have, I was going to say subtly, but also not so subtly, shifted in a very dramatic way to focusing on how we look as being the thing that gets us status, safety, belonging.
As a psychologist, when you think about the Looksmaxxing trend, phenomenon, movement, what comes to mind immediately?
Yeah, I think like sadness comes to mind, and also a kind of understanding that when we have been taught that there is a pathway to get the thing that we all long for, like to feel enough, especially if we didn't get told that, if in our early attachment experiences or socially, we were left feeling like we're not lovable, we're not good enough as we are, that to find a way in our world to get the thing that we all come into the world longing for, like, of course, I'm never going to sit across from a person who's engaging in strategies like that and say, you're bad, you should know better, right? Like, this is, we're all trying to navigate a world and feel certain things about ourselves. And what I know just categorically is that at the end of people's lives, the things that they think about, the things that they wish for, the things that they reflect on are not, did I look a certain way when I was 20 or 50? They were like, shoot, I wish I would have told those people I loved them. I wish I would have taken more risks. I wish I would have had the experiences that I really wanted. I wish I would have cared less about what other people think. Reliably, that's what people who are dying and aging will say. And so it comes back to, are we living the lives that we want to live? Or are we living the lives that we've been told that we need to live? Or are we chasing something that is ultimately going to be empty and not get us the thing that we're really longing for, or will put us in a certain direction where, as it starts to slip from our grasp, we realize that there has been so much time that we've missed out on, or the people that we love, we haven't actually gotten to know, or we've lived our entire lives looking at ourselves from the outside instead of experiencing our lives from the inside. So I feel the sadness of it, but I also understand, like, all of the research theories say when we have been made to feel powerless, of course we're going to try to find power. When we've been made to feel constricted, and that's normal for us, it's really hard to push back against that and find a kind of freedom unless something comes along and liberates us, which is another way of thinking about what aging does.
The thing that stands out to me is the extremes now, the extremes in which people are going. It's not subtle. And so when I first read about this, I'm like, this must be a joke. But Gen Z hitting themselves with a hammer in their jawline and citing examples of like UFC fighters that have gotten like punched in the face. So it's not just a hammer, but it's like hard objects, and trying to contour and reshape chin lines. And so when you hear about those sorts of extremes, like, what do you think that says about someone's psychology of now where they've ended up with this conversation?
Well, without knowing the specifics of the person, what I know is that the level of our defensive strategy is relative to the level of distress that we're trying to avoid. So you can imagine that if somebody is going to extremes for something, that what they're trying to manage inside of them is probably really extreme. And instead of seeing that person again, like as bad in any way, that thinking about more about like, where did that distress come from? Like, why do we have to take such extreme measures to manage such extreme distress? That there is a whole system that is benefiting from creating distress in people, that there are events that in our lives are unmanageable traumas that we experience that expose us to distress inside that otherwise feels unmanageable. And usually because we feel unsupported to deal with the actual thing, that when a society hands us a narrative and says, well, we'll try this, like this will help you feel better, and we're not getting any other way or any other pathway that's as celebrated or reinforced, it seems like it's pretty easy to fall into, as far as I'm concerned. And that's just like, this is the other piece, is that when we're managing our distress in certain ways, like maybe somebody is doing something that's harming themselves, or maybe they're doing something that's not exactly pro-social, or let's just say their depression is such that their way of managing their distress or social anxiety is to withdraw themselves. That isn't being socially reinforced. Things like IV drug use. Generally, people aren't like, hey, way to go. You're going to get more likes on social media. But when somebody is changing their appearance as a way of resolving the distress inside, and everyone around them says like, hey, there's more opportunities available for you. You're going to be loved. You're going to be valued. You're going to be chosen. That the managing of the distress combined with us actually getting praised, it's pretty hard to compete with. There needs to be something that is more compelling, more meaningful, more relationally robust to protect us from that, because the pull of it can be so strong.
Yeah. I mean, it almost seems so, it just seems insane that we would be like, someone would be proposing to do that. And you hear these like, okay, Gen Z's hitting themselves in the face with a hammer to make themselves more attractive.
Right.
The fact that we would like hitting ourselves with a blunt object now sounds like self-harm sounds like a reasonable thing to do, a reasonable trade-off.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't even know what to say to it. Yes.
Isn't it? Well, okay, I'll tell you this. My sense of it is both. It's absurd that we do this, but I also come to this conversation having had an eating disorder for well over a decade that put me in a hospital, where it started off as, oh, my body's looking better. Oh, and people are really like reminding me that my body is matching the ideal, and that feels really good. And wow, I have more agency and I feel more in control. And then you end up in a hospital and you're on a feeding tube or a medication, or you can't even walk because you're in such cardiac distress. Like the distance between that and hitting yourself in the face with a hammer doesn't feel so far for me. But often we don't have people necessarily in hospitalization for eating disorders also promoting this on social media as being something that we should all do, or like, it's for you too. I mean, there is like Thinspiration and there is lots of diet culture out there, but it seems that our mental illnesses, as we've, called them, like our, things like eating disorders in particular, have been relegated to the realm of the medical and the hospital, and things that are as equally extreme, it sounds like now, or something that feels like, oh, hey, you could do this too. Yeah. Like something you just might run into on TikTok, almost like in an infomercial style. But I get what it's like to live there. And what I can tell you is that I was not okay. Right? I was not okay, and that the eating disorder was a management strategy of how not okay I was.
It's actually a very, I didn't initially think about that, but I guess that's another way of, well, I'm just like not going to eat, I'm purging myself of eating is another way of self-harm. And yeah, it's like a really good parallel.
Yeah, I get what it's like. And mind you, there's like, I know within the eating disorder community, sometimes there is a a sense of like, okay, this is what I have to do. And this is what feels good. And this is right. And then there's also the other experience that can be there at the very same time, which is I feel trapped in this and I'm not okay. And I need some way to get out of this, but I am so scared of what's going to happen if I don't live my life this way, that it feels safer sometimes to continue to be in these patterns of behavior that are so harming, so restrictive, so unwell, because they actually are providing some kind of safety from the terror of what it's like to let my body be a human body. I mean, this is like how scary it is in our culture to be a human and what age normally, that we would take such extremes to let our body be different, to let our body be in some way unruly, to let it age, to let it be soft, to let it be kind of in these in-betweens. Like we have constructed that as terrifying, such that everything else that is actually potentially harming us or restricting our life feels like a relief from that.
I mean, the Looksmaxxing thing is a new trend, but obviously plastic surgery has been, and cosmetic surgery has been a thing for a minute now. And so, but the way that I think the difference is the way that it's being talked about is also changing. And so it used to be something that was more hidden. You kind of whispered about it, or maybe even just constant denial. And some people still do that, but now it's talked about openly, even like publicly. I mean, last summer, you know, the whole Kris Jenner facelift thing, like a moment like that is an example of public praise around this, and that was not hidden. And so, you know, as a psychologist, like, what do you, when you see a moment like that or moments like it, what do you feel like welling up in yourself when those sorts of things become celebrated?
Again, I notice a kind of sadness mixed with, of course, right? Of course we're doing this. This is like everything that we have been taught that we should do. And it's just on display. On some level, there's a kind of relief, like, okay, now we can be explicit about the things that have always been living inside of this culture, and we can critique them, we can talk about them, we can see them on full display instead of having to pretend that they're not there. But ultimately, the sadness for me is in realizing this is costing us so much in terms of the kinds of lives that are available to us. When we are so preoccupied with our appearance, we miss out on so much. And I can't help but think about this in terms of the embodiment conversation. Embodiment sits very kind of right at the heart of existentialism. Like, what does it mean to be human? And is what we want for our lives to be living in these kind of two-dimensional portrayals of an image that we're constantly feeling afraid is going to be taken from us? Or do we want something that is robust and 3 or 4 dimensional, is like, has sensuality, has a sense of meaning and purpose? And I think for some people, the pull is so great that something that feels like material and human and face-to-face and authentic and embodied is like becoming kind of irrelevant.
Yeah. I mean, I'm so interested as a psychologist, the shift in the language piece, right? What do you make of that, right? Because at one level, it's like presenting bodies and appearances that there's so much that goes into like that actually happening. And then, so it's one thing to deny and be like, no, this is like naturally how I am. And it's just the cards that I've been dealt. But then the other end is the normalization of it. It's so normal to talk about these things. It's so normal to do them. And so how do you think about that trade-off that's been made?
That there is a kind of normalization of some of these things.
Do you think do you think it's a positive shift that we've now talking about these things so openly, or are you concerned that creates like a normalization about it?
The other layer that's missing in those two options that you give is our critique of something.
Yeah.
So what we know in feminist analysis of appearance-based messages, when we're looking at the kind of the psychology of what variables mediate our exposure to an idea into the internalization of it, is our ability to think critically about it. So again, I've got a 4-year-old daughter. When I think about exposing her to media at some point in her life, maybe her having a social media account, there is a part of me that thinks like, oh, I'm kind of nervous about that. Like, I just don't, right? Like the classic sleeping narrative of the parents who are like the thimble or like the needle on the spindle is going to, she says, yeah, the spindle is going to kill you. So put it in a tower and never get access to it. But the thing that we know from developmental literature and parenting and image-based discourse is actually we need to teach people how to think critically about what we're experiencing. So is the normalization of it as much of a problem as our inability to think critically about it? I think that what we probably need to do more of is have more conversations about how to protect ourselves from what we're hearing, so that as we're exposed to it in the world, as things are kind of normalized around us, we can notice that this is the water that we're swimming in, but have a filter through which to interpret it that protects us from it.
I think that's interesting in terms of being able to think in that sort of way, because I think the concept of agency and choice becomes kind of muddied if you're in a context where everything is increasingly visible, talked about, normalized. It kind of becomes the default path that you're on unless you start having those sort of conversations with yourself.
Yeah, and actively, again, we were talking about this earlier, how do we intentionally decide to divert from the path that's set forward for us? Because there is a gravitational pull to a phenomena, to a pressure when it's normalized around us, that we actually have to take some sort of stance to decide we're not going to get pulled into that in the same way that other people are. But how do we even know how to take a stance unless we become aware of the cost of it, what it's doing, and that it's happening at all? So having conversations like this, where we're naming the problems with the anti-aging discourse, allow us to start being aware of it. Even like when we're looking, Gene Kilborn ages ago, like in the 90s, created this documentary series. It was kind of the first around media literacy. I think it might have been called Killing Me Softly. And the idea with her workshops and lectures and skill-based interventions was teaching people how to interpret language such that they become aware of what the media is doing to them. What's the intended effect? Who benefits? What's the story here? What are they trying to push? So even seeing the way that our advertisements or training ourselves, our gaze, our children, our peers, to look at, does something have a filter on it? What is that doing? How does that make me feel? What is it shaping what my brain unconsciously thinks is normal? It takes a level of awareness and consciousness and thought process that is really hard to engage in when we just want to tune out and scroll mindlessly on our phones, or just kind of be a passive recipient to things because life is hard and we're just wanting to consume media. There's a kind of, I don't want to say vigilance, but stance or awareness that we have to take. Otherwise, it's all just becoming part of our introjects. And our introjects are what we would say in, psychodynamic theory, or just the things that actually start out here and very slowly over time start to feel like our own thoughts. They come from somewhere else, but when we rehearse them enough and hear them enough, we start to believe that they're actually our own.
The thing that's challenging, and you mentioned this in one of our previous episodes, is it's not just what we're seeing through the media and on social media specifically, but how all of these huge societal shifts have had an impact on how we talk about aging and appearance with our friends and our family. And so the ability to kind of think critically and choose a different narrative becomes muddied by that piece of the equation too. And so you've talked about something called the fat talk principle, which I think is extremely relevant here. Can you unpack that for me?
Mm-hmm. So anthropologist Mimi Neekter coined the term fat talk as a way of describing the social bonding ritual that women go through as a way of, again, establishing social safety. She called it in one of the writings a kind of social glue. And the idea with fat talk is that it could be about, size and shape and weight, but really it's about appearance. And the idea is that women bond socially by making self-deprecating comments about their bodies. And the idea is doing this allows us to stay connected as women, allows us to stay close to each other. And if you decide to not participate in fat talk, right, negative talk about your body, if you were deciding to say, hey, I'm actually okay with how I look, or like, I'm kind of curious about aging, or I really like this version of myself and I can't wait to get to know her as she grows up even more, that creates social threat. And the story embedded in that is if you are pushing back on these dehumanizing and really objectifying narratives about your body, particularly as women, that you're, well, just like detached from reality, right? You're arrogant or you don't belong anymore. So we keep each other in this position of feeling badly about our bodies, about body dissatisfaction as a means of staying connected to other people. Mind you, of course, there are exceptions, right? If you're listening to this and you're like, not me and my friends, great. But anthropologically, what we can see is that there's a trend that happens for women around how women, as you kind of identified earlier, become collaborators with patriarchy and misogyny by internalizing the messages and policing each other. If we can make our way of connecting with each other a way of reinforcing these ideals, then we've bought into the system, but also then anything that threatens this gets excluded. And here we are. We stay kind of reinforcing these loops. And this is like, I mean, these ideas might sound out there for some, or like, well, I don't talk about fatness with my friend, or I don't talk about like, if hating my body with my friends. But what we know is that the more likely we are to challenge the social script, the more likely we are to encounter some of these relational walls that we bump up against. So here's a good example of this. I've researched women's relationships with their bodies across the lifespan since I started academic work. And I've studied women's experiences of puberty and their bodies changing, matrescence and becoming a parent and a mother and experiencing what birth does, women who are midlife, women who are aging, women who are menopausal and perimenopausal, women who are later in life and are reflecting back on their younger years as a body and are parenting and whatnot. So I've got this sample of women across the lifespan who've been talking about their bodies with me. And primarily the angle that I'm looking at is what happens when it goes well, right? Yeah. Because this is kind of like, I'm trying to push back with some of my research and say, okay, maybe we've all bought into this body dissatisfaction thing because we haven't been exposed to other narratives. What if there is actually something else out there? And what women in research about perimenopause and menopause are saying is, I'm scared to tell my friends who are struggling that I'm doing well, so I keep it to myself. Or they might say, well, I tried to tell someone that actually, like, I'm feeling really more empowered than I have ever been. And all of a sudden it was like she didn't want to talk to me anymore. Or we have the woman who's had this really powerful birth experience and has said like, whoa, I feel like something is unlocked inside of me where I am connected to a source of power inside. I had no idea was there, but I don't know how to talk about it with anyone because it seems like when I try to say, hey, actually this went well for me, the conversation shuts down and they just stop wanting to hang out, or like all of a sudden I can't reach them in the same way. It's like they shut off. Or younger women saying, hey, I'm okay with my body. And literally them being excluded from things like birthday parties and hangouts and like social gatherings, that this phenomena might seem abstract, but when it's actually coming down to what women who feel like a deep kind of body appreciation are saying is that there is a loss of social connection for them in relationships where the underlying assumption that they didn't even know was there was that we had to be not okay with ourselves in order to be okay with each other.
Yeah, I want to get into that because I think that when we're locked into these narratives, right, and these huge societal shifts, the Looksmaxxing, the procedures, the way that what we talk to each other, it's kind of like it's like there's some sense of control now that we're now regaining over ourselves and our lives and the way that we look, and it's kind of like this convincing individually and as a group that like if we just do enough that we can stay desirable. But there are real biological limits to that, right? So there's a point where the body changes in ways that we can't fully offset, right? Mm-hmm. So like if you're past a certain age, you still might be able to get a facelift, but everything else might change in certain ways that like you're just not going to look a particular way. And so if we know that there's an end to this, technically, why do you think we keep chasing something that we know we can't ultimately win?
denial is a very, very powerful thing. And our ability to try to grab at agency to get a little bit of control back while we still have a chance is a really compelling strategy. I mean, I wish I could offer you something that was more complicated or eloquent than that. But the truth is, I think if we know that something is going to happen, that can sometimes create more of a sense of powerlessness, which has us try to compensate by trying to get power back in the ways that we can as we're able to. Again, that's not the case for everybody. There are people who feel like, okay, this is happening. I'm just going to allow it to happen. And maybe I'll grieve along the way and I'll like try some things. But, I have a very close friend of mine who said recently, we were talking about injectables and Botox in particular. And I remember I was, talking to somebody else about injectables and Botox. And I'd said to them, I don't think any of my friends have had Botox. And then I realized I haven't actually asked them about that. So I, started surveying some of my close friends who are feminists and in the body liberation movement. Have you used injectables? Have you used Botox at all? Like, tell me about that. And I had a couple friends say, yes, I have. And I felt like kind of nervous to say anything about it because I'm holding these two realities inside that, like, we call this double consciousness in the menopause conversation. Like, I'm aging and I also feel kind of excited about being free from that game that I've been supposed to be playing. And so one of my close friends had said, yes, I've used Botox and I did it a few times. And then I realized what's the point? And for other people, it might go the other way. Like, okay, I'm gonna use more. And once I've done that, well, they're selling me this product. And this is the kind of thing that I'm gonna start to use because as aging is slipping away, my efforts to try to prevent it have to increase as well.
I think that's really, it reminds me of, we had Dr. Becky Kenny on here. She was talking about parenting, but she introduced this idea of how two things can be true at once. And I think about that when you're speaking. It's like sometimes we see a person who does a horrible thing, but then they're like a model citizen or a great character in all these other areas. And it's like we're complicated as human beings. Mm-hmm. And so at one level, we could believe certain things. We could be a feminist and stand for all these ideals. And then the other end, there's this other part of us that is at war. In IFS, they talk about like the different parts of the self, and so I think it's really interesting to understand. I mean, how do you then reconcile like those different parts of yourself, and are you merging them into like a singular sort of identity to actually make a decision and do something differently?
Mm-hmm. Well, when it comes to the double consciousness phenomena at midlife and for perimenopausal women, that tension often exists for a certain amount of time. And then as we've been talking about, the body wins. In a sense, the body moves us towards a sense of knowing, okay, this is the path that I'm taking. And it seems that how you reconcile those things has a lot to do with your meaning-making strategies about aging. So if you're carrying a tension inside that says, on one hand, I am really scared of losing social value. Society has told me that as a woman, I become irrelevant and invisible as I'm aging. Oof, this feels really sad and painful and scary. And on the other hand, there's this whole other emancipatory discourse that's emerging for me where I get to be part of liberation from a struggle that constrained me my whole life that I didn't really want to be a part of, but I couldn't find my way out of. And if the tension that you're holding is resolved by a meaning-making strategy that says aging is dangerous, you'll probably get pulled in one way or the other. If you have people around you saying, like, just fight it a little bit longer. Whereas there might be exposure relationally or internally to another meaning-making strategy that says, I have a way of making sense of aging that allows me to trust it. So for example, in my research with menopausal women, there was a woman who was saying that her way of negotiating perimenopause and the double consciousness and the conflict and the confusion and the unrest was mitigated by saying, I actually know how to do this because I've done this through so many other seasons of my life. And she offered this metaphor that she said she relied heavily on during labor and birth and pregnancy, which was, okay, I'm on this river and the river is taking me. and I can grab a hold to a root on the side of the river, like just hanging on for dear life to try to prevent myself from going down. Or I can let go. I can trust the river is good and will take me where I need to go and is part of a beautiful ride. And she said that that was useful for her on a very small scale, like a short time frame during pregnancy and labor and birth. And that she found herself referencing it as she was aging by saying to herself, okay, this is actually just a more extended version of the same thing I've already navigated in my life. If I can trust that the river is good, if it was good before, maybe it's good now. And maybe it's taking me somewhere that I can trust, then instead of fighting it and resisting, I can feel the grief and the fear of letting go, but I can also relax into this process and maybe even enjoy it along the way. So that's a good example of a narrative or meaning-making filter that allows us to move in one direction or the other. And part of why I think I'm so passionate about these conversations is that we're not exposed to those narratives very often. It's such a countercultural story to say, hey, you can trust this. Aging is safe. It's okay. And take care of yourself and be in relationship with your body and be attuned to your body. That will serve you well. But here are some strategies about how you can organize what's happening for you in a way that makes it feel less terrifying and more like part of becoming more of who you are.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it's interesting because I hadn't thought about that. So do you feel like meaning making is the unlock to acceptance then?
Yeah, part of it. Yeah. And we see that in research about death too. Like, what is the story that I'm telling about aging? What's the story I'm telling about dying? What is the story I'm telling about becoming a parent? What's the story that I'm telling about the struggle that I'm having in my career around like stretching myself creatively or expressing myself? If the way that we're interpreting what's happening has a certain filter to it, a certain lens, it can support us or it can constrict us. And we don't think about those filters very often because those are the ones that are just kind of handed to us as part of our initiation into our culture. Hate aging, be scared of it, be afraid of it. It's dangerous, it's dirty, it's old, it's creepy, it's sick. It's, like all of the things that we hear about it. But if we're exposed to ideas, particularly of people who are aging, who are saying, I'm feeling connected to my power and my worth, and I just know shit that I could have never known before, and you can take that from me. Like, I just don't care about what other people think in the way that I used to. I know what I know, and it belongs to me, and it feels good. Then all of a sudden we have exposure to ideas about aging in particular that allow more possibility for us. And that's not to say that when we're exposed to more productive, healthy narratives that we don't struggle, but we might have a way, particularly when the narrative is like a really good one, of including struggle in the process of development. So without getting into toxic positivity, like, assuming like maybe a story we're handed is aging is perfect and it's great and it feels awesome.
Yeah.
Maybe a way of saying like, when I'm aging, I actually can draw on life experience that helps me negotiate the difficult things and make sense of them. And I can pull on the relationships and the things that I know to feel myself safe and at ease in all of the things that are feeling uprooted. Like, that's a narrative that includes struggle, that includes challenge, and that it allows us to, again, not be in the kind of denial of what's hard, but to welcome all of that in the spirit of two things can be true at once, while also holding it in a way that allows us to see that we can, in fact, hold it.
What if someone doesn't feel like they have anything to fall back on? Like they don't have any previous example to look at of sort of resilience in another area of life?
I would say that we all do. We might just need help finding it. In fact, if you have survived puberty, if you've ever stuck your neck out for something and felt like you failed and you lived past that, like, I think we might assume that the proof that we have of resilience is our successes, when actually what we know from theories like anti-fragility and stress mindset theory and positive disintegration theory, that it's actually the struggle that allows us to be with more of the struggle in life, our ability to have survived some of the rough things that we've been through. So if a person is saying, all I've ever done has been through like hardship after hardship, I would say, yeah, you have a lot of proof then that you can get through this too.
Now, there does seem to be a letting go of a lot of things, right? So, you mentioned, the studies that you've done. And so at one level, a woman would be letting go of, for example, the attention that she's going to receive, which on one level, it's like, I didn't want to be treated as a sexual object to begin with. And now I'm just not getting that attention. So it's not even a possibility. And so what did you learn about the whole letting go process of certain things are not happening or possible anymore? And then the freedom that would sort of be on the other side of that.
Mm-hmm. It comes back to the double consciousness, which is that at times there's a real kind of grief that needs to happen around loss of something that we had bought into, put a lot of time and energy into, and believed would get us something that, made us feel good inside. And the ability to grieve is part of making space for something new. So I think that we just need to be having more conversations about how painful it is to lose something that we were told is valuable, including an appearance or a stage of life. Like that's allowed to hurt without that making you shallow. That's allowed to hurt without it meaning that you aren't more than that. But what is surprising is that women are saying, yes, I might be losing the social value, but there's also a group of women who are saying, I am so glad to be losing that way of being valued because it was always conditional. It was always something that made me flat. It was always something that constricted me. And so now I get to be out of a game that I never wanted to play, that I never chose to play, but it kind of like I was thrust into it by sexualization, by objectification, by media, by my family, by my trauma survival strategies. And now I actually get to live life on my terms. But it's important to recognize that often comes with a kind of crisis. Like midlife in particular, we don't really talk about it very much as this, but it is a developmental transition. It is a huge period of psychological and social growth and change. And we framed it in terms of loss, but when we look at it from a developmental perspective, it is actually just another step in the process of becoming who we are. We learn things as we negotiate a crisis. And crisis here, I don't mean like, you're on the edge or you're having to call 911 or there's like something really actively threatening in your life. Crisis from a developmental perspective means that there is a threat to who we knew ourselves to be. And there's going to be time that it takes to negotiate the loss of that. But how we negotiate the loss of that actually supports us with the next phase of life and who we get to be on the other side of it. So instead of shunning or silencing the feelings of threat or loss or the letting go that we have to do, I wonder what would happen if we dug into it. And I wonder what would happen if we talked about it more and we grieved that we had to buy in for so long, or that we actually were told this story at all, that who we are is defined by how we look.
I read this book a number of years ago now. It's called American Hookup. It was about hookup culture taking over college campuses and whatnot. And it was by sociologist Lisa Wade. And I think it's relevant when talking about letting go and kind of this cost benefit here. She wrote, there's not really nothing quite like knowing that someone wants us. We are told to love ourselves, to love our bodies, but this is no substitute. The pleasure of being desired has to come from the desire of someone else. And there's no doubt it can feel amazing. And so I think it's interesting because there is something, even if it's like your husband or a friend, or the attention that you would get, there's something, and I don't know if that's like a dopaminergic type of thing that we are addicted to, but it feels like it's like intoxicating. And if you feel like that's completely off the table, we're not going to have that experience in life. What do you think about when you hear a quote like that and what it says about the human experience?
Mm-hmm. I think about it again through the lens of a trauma clinician, just about how so many of our experiences of attachment neglect prime us to long to be chosen in a way that we were never chosen previously.
Yeah.
And it's not a bad thing to want to be desired or longed for. In fact, our brain responds that way for a good reason. Like there's all sorts of evolutionary reasons that it feels as good as it does. And what we forget is that, or maybe in our culture and the way that we've constructed desire, we limit desire to be this kind of sexualized thing that happens in a romantic context. And I love it if we could expand desire to include a conversation that's more broadly about eros and the erotic. When we think about eros and the erotic as being like desire for connection and expansion and life. And when we think about what it's like to be desired and chosen and wanted by more, for more inside of us than just our looks, what it makes me think about is how romantic so many of my female friendships are. And the way that my social context, as I've constructed it at this time of my life, is full of desire, of people saying like, oh, I really wish that you would have been there with me in that moment. That would have felt so good to have you there. You would have known exactly what to say. Or the kind of desire I have when I get good news and all I want to do is get one of my best friends on the phone and like freak out about it. Like the desire to have someone enter fully into your experience and say like, I want you in my life because it's better when you're in it, is a kind of desire that I think moves us beyond the narrow restriction of the sexualization of desire into what it is like to feel like we are really chosen in a deep way by family, by friends, and maybe even this might be a bit of a stretch for some people, to imagine that maybe life is choosing us back. Like to imagine that life is actually desiring for us to be in relationship with it in a way that transcends body or object. But is it possible that on some large scale, I mean, we're kind of moving into cosmology and spirituality here, but what is it like to imagine that life itself longs for me to be the fullest version of myself? Yeah. That actually it is beneficial on an evolutionary level when I am my most expansive, empowered, vibrant self. Could it be possible that that is good for life and that life actually is desiring the same way that a tree desires to expand and grow its branches? And, I live in a community where there are a ton of oak trees and the acorns are just like all the time. Like there is an evolutionary function to that oak tree stretching its leaves as far as it can go and the acorns dropping, that life actually wants that to happen. And what if that's true of us too, that life on a level benefits, like for all of us, when we are not our most restricted, contorted, distracted versions of ourselves, but these embodied humans that are full of aliveness. Yeah. Could it be that there is something good for all of us when we're that way too?
Is there a difference if we are sort of forced into this versus we choose it willingly? And what I mean by that is like an agency sense, right? So we talked off on a little bit about the people that don't even have the financial means, right, to pursue plastic surgery or have some of these procedures or spend all this money doing this stuff. And so at some level, there's a factor of money that is influenced, right? So it's not even possible for them. And so they're kind of walled off for it. And so the goal that they were pursuing, it's just like, well, I don't have an opportunity to do that. And I'm like bitter about it versus I am consciously willing, I'm taking my agency to resist against this and choose a different narrative for my life. Does that make a difference?
I think that it can, in terms of how much you're up against and the barriers that you feel about encountering the way that our social value also intersects with things like financial privilege, access to different kinds of treatments and whatnot. But I think that there are many different ways to come to the stance that this isn't working for me. And it could be, this isn't working for me because it's not accessible financially. This isn't working for me because it compromises something for me existentially. This isn't working for me because this treatment actually isn't possible based on my health needs. Like I have women regularly who I'm working with who will say, I keep seeing in media all the time that HRT, hormone replacement therapy, is the way to survive perimenopause, and I can't access it because of my medical conditions. There are things that exclude me from that. And so what do I do, right? There are times when the social story about what is accessible competes with our very specific human needs. And we feel like ooh, we're at a loss if this thing has been promised to us, but also in order to be attuned to our bodies and be well, we have to choose something different. And so is it a choice? Is a good question, but we can arrive at the divergent path through all sorts of means. It's accessible through many different doors. And sometimes we choose to get there. And other times it's chronic illness, it's disability, it's a surgery, it's a health concern, it's an existential reality, it's a mental health concern, it's a financial concern, it's whatever it is that says that story doesn't account for me and my body. And so I have to find a different one in order to be able to live in a way that feels good for me.
Now, I find your studies to be fascinating. I mean, you referenced them briefly earlier, but there were these like 3 paths that women can take where we treat aging women like a pathology, we treat aging women like a problem, and there's sort of like a third path. And so can you lay out those and the conditions around them?
Yeah. So I was first introduced to the discourse around aging women, in particular, the discourses around perimenopause and menopause from a study by Copeland and Williams that was published in 2002. So a while ago now. And yet what they were talking about was how aging women and aging women's bodies are talked about in media and culture. And they kind of pulled back the invisibility of these things that are influencing everything from the stories you might hear in the doctor's office, to the way that you talk about things with your friends, to what's in the media, to what's not being talked about and what's not visible. And there are 3 different discourses. I'll use like less academic language to talk about them. The first one I'll say is like, your body's a problem. And that goes very well with, and I can help you solve it. And for 3 easy payments of $49.99 or whatever, this treatment or this thing. And often there's a hierarchy involved where there's somebody who's got the secret and the answer, and they can help you solve the problem around your body, whether it's a doctor or it's a pill or it's a treatment or it's a thing. Like your body is a problem and someone else has got to save you from that problem. The second discourse would be more like, okay, this is happening and I'm powerless to this. And maybe my body is still a problem, but I'm going to save myself. I'm going to take matters into my own hands. And maybe this goes along with things like alternative treatments, or like, okay, I'm going to manage my body, but I'm going to do it on my terms. I'm not going to buy into big industry or big pharma. I'm not going to buy into kind of the diet industry. I'm going to do perimenopause by eating yams. And that's going to be the way that I manage my hormones. And I'm going to do it my way. And I'm taking some power back, but I'm taking power back over my body. That's still a problem. There's a bit more agency in there. And then the third discourse is the emancipatory discourse. And this idea is about liberation and freedom. And what this discourse is about is seeing that aging, midlife, maybe in perimenopause, menopause, is not just a problem to be solved, but actually is something to walk into. The language you might hear people talk about is like, it's a portal, right? It's a pathway to transformation and becoming free from the things that constrained you your whole life. Now, I think it's possible, but I want to add a little bit of nuance to the discourse around emancipation. This is not, don't care about yourself. This is not, well, then who cares how much protein I'm eating or my bone density? Like, it doesn't matter because I'm free from caring about my body. Because there are so many different ways of caring about and for yourself as a body that don't keep you constantly in the loop of having to treat yourself like an object. But it's really about seeing midlife as a bio-psychosocial spiritual transition, where whenever our bodies are changing, that does something to how we see the world, how the world sees us, and how we can feel and experience ourselves. And when we lean into that opportunity of change, it allows us to think critically about what we've experienced, about how it feels to be us, and participate in our own evolution in a way that can take us into more power and agency.
So what unlocks for someone if they stop organizing their lives around the way that they look? What suddenly becomes possible that wasn't before?
Yeah, well, the possibility of organizing your life around what feels good. Like, oh my gosh, this could be groundbreaking. Things like I've heard women talk about living their whole life picking the thing on the menu at the restaurant that they know has the least calories in it. Not even what they like. They don't even like what they're eating. They're just choosing the menu item because it keeps them closest to the thin ideal. And then there's a point in their life when they realize, like, I don't have very much time left. I've lived my whole life eating this crappy food that like doesn't taste like anything and just leaves me feeling like hungry at the end. And I'm going to eat what I want on the menu. And they start to realize that there's this whole other pathway of being a body that includes actual agency and pleasure and a sense of feeling satisfied and realizing, oh, I get to inhabit myself instead of seeing myself like an object. So what's on the other side of this? Being in your own skin, making choices about yourself. And actually, I think, what we're all after is the experience of being alive and feeling like you get to be you in this life, that you get to feel good.
What about like the attention piece, right? Because we talked about like surveillance and like self-monitoring. And so where does your attention shift then if it's no longer on your appearance?
Yeah. So if you're not paying attention to your appearance, it could go on any number of things like what you're thinking and how the world is and what you like and what you want to create. And what we see, like a good measure of this is something we call interoception. That women who are more preoccupied, I should say people, because the studies on this have been shown across sex to be stable. The findings are stable across sex. That people who are more preoccupied with objectifying themselves are less concerned with what it feels like on the inside of them. And the inverse is also true, that the more concerned we are, and I shouldn't say concerned, but aware, in tune with, in relationship with, what are the experiences I'm having as a body? Like, I notice I feel a little hot. Can I take my sweater off? Oh, I'm noticing like, I'm tired. I'm going to go lay down. Oh, I'm hungry. I'm going to feed myself. That we have more data with which to actually care for our bodies in a way that isn't about maintaining an ideal, but is about increasing our experience of being well in our lives and enjoying our quality of lives.
What about like would change about the way that you relate to other people in social circles and other things? Yeah.
So fascinating research about interoception, like I was just talking about, is that the more you're in tune with what's inside, it seems to inoculate you against social pressures or against discourse that you're seeing in media. It's almost like, that's not for me. It's not about me. It's like, I'm doing a different thing. Like I can see it. Like if I'm not a truck driver, someone's trying to sell me a truck, I'll be like, there's an ad about a truck, but it like doesn't hook me in the same way.
Not interested in
I'm
it.
Like, I'm just like it's not part of my identity to drive a truck. So it may be possible that when we are experiencing more awareness of our inside, like what does it feel like to be us and what feels good to be me, that we just see ourselves as on a different trajectory, like the advertisements, the messages. So it's like, it's not for me. It's not about me. And fascinating too, what should be noted is that interoceptive skill, like, can I feel what it's like inside of my own skin instead of just seeing myself from the outside as an object, has been linked to higher levels of intuition. And what we know is that women at midlife who are opting out of the appearance game and are saying, I feel so free to be myself, are reporting that they're more connected to an intuitive sense. I know what I know, and I know it in an embodied way, and you can't take it from me, right? It's mine, and it lives inside of my bones. And so there is this correlation between knowing being something and evaluation being something outside of us and our concern about our managing of our appearance, and that being different from I care more about the inside and how it feels to be me, and I can trust who I am in the world, and it feels good to know what I know.
Yeah, I think what's interesting about the social engagement piece, we had another guest on and he was talking about how often we are in social interactions and we're trying to get worth and validation out of those social interactions. And so beauty is just one form of currency of that. I mean, success would be another one of like, how do I be like the most important person in the room? And I think the question becomes like when you're living inside that equation of like appearance equals worth, how would you get somebody to understand themselves in a more expansive way than they've been? Like if appearance is like the only thing that's like true about me, how do you then think about yourself in a more expansive way that would be like an unlock?
Thinking about experiences of connection and the impact that we have on people. I mean, I'm bringing in the conversation about death a lot today because I think it's so relevant with aging. But what Irving Yalom, who's a psychiatrist and has written a very seminal text on existentialism called The Existential Psychotherapy, What he talks about in some of his work is something called rippling. And the idea of rippling is that we can protect ourselves from the fear of aging and the fear of, well, I should say more of the fear of dying by experiencing our impact on other people and their impact on us. So when we think about social connection, what is it like to know that we could matter to someone because of the way that we connect with them and the imprint that we leave on them and how they feel about themselves, what they experience in the world? Like, I know that there are, no matter how deeply rooted in appearance management you are, we all know the people that we can laugh with the easiest, right? We all know the people who we're like, we can say anything to, and it just feels like, I'm home with you. And so what would it be like for us to think about being the kind of people in the world who, instead of we're so constricted in how we saw ourselves as just about appearance, thinking about what would it be like to be in an interaction with someone where we actually experienced connection? Again, it brings to mind things like Martin Buber's I thou concept, the idea of the way that we treat ourselves and each other as objects, and how this, spark becomes illuminated when we experience the sacredness in the other and we really see them. Not only does it pull us out of our preoccupation with how we look, but it pulls us into this totally different realm, which is where aliveness actually happens. So I think if we're caring less about what we think, what would it be like? What would it be like to think about the experiences that we're having?
Do you see worth as a constellation of factors that you would then organize your life around? And one of them is the way that you're talking about the way that we interact with other people. And what I really mean by that is could doing a trade-off of for example, if you do trade-off of my worth was in my beauty, but now I'm a 52-year-old woman and now I'm a super powerful person. And so now that becomes my identity. Sure. Is that just a linear trade-off, or is there certain things in which there's a sustainable way about thinking about yourself that does not fall into those traps?
Some good questions that we could ask ourselves might be, who is it for? Yeah. Have I switched one role of the way that I try to express myself to feel good enough? Have I switched this thing for that thing? Or does it feel like this is actually me connecting to myself? And does the way that I am in the world spring from an expression of already knowing that I am valuable? Or is it a way to try to accrue value? So those might be some assessment questions we could ask ourselves, who's this for? And does this come from a deep kind of knowing? And think about how this relates to appearance too. There's a difference when we dress for someone else than when we dress for ourselves. And we might dress with as much expression, or might feel when I'm dressing for someone else, I'm dressing based on what makes me look like a sexual object. But when I'm dressing for myself, it's color, it's fun. It doesn't necessarily reinforce the ideals, but it feels so good. And it's a different kind of feeling good than when I'm trying to chase something that only someone else can give me and could also be taken away. So who is it for? Where does it come from inside? And there's, I think there's a real difference between feeling like I'm not chasing beauty anymore. I'm chasing power, or I'm chasing intelligence, or I'm chasing financial status. There's a difference between that and saying, my power isn't about power over anymore. It's not about comparison or conquering or achieving. My power is coming from a place of being connected to the fact that I know what I know, or I've lived through what I've lived through, or I have something to offer. Thinking about the construction of power as power for or power with, that maybe my value is because I have something to offer. Yeah. And again, not to be used like an object, but when we think about women's identity at midlife and identity shifting, often away from I'm a sexual object, I'm a fertile body, I'm a body that is used or sexualized, to I'm an elder, allows them to shift and move into a kind of position of power that really, when you think about it, is power is it's about distribution of knowing. It's about caring for. It's about saying, I can help people learn things that I had to figure out on my own.
For a lot of history, right? So whether you want to think about it like spiritually, cosmically, like a source or the universe or God, is there a sense in which we need to feel like we're held or loved, or that we have a sense of inherent worth for this entire equation to work out? And how would you think about that?
I would say that it's definitely a protective factor to be connected to a source of unconditional love, whatever that is, whether that's through community or family or a deity or a sense of the universe or God, however you want to put it. That was actually a finding from one of my earliest research studies, is that spirituality isn't often talked about as it relates to body image, right? We might think about those things as kind of antithetical, but what we found in the research is that when women felt like there was a source of love that they were connected to, whatever that was, but in the case of my research study, it was a sense of universal love, that it was protective for them, that there was less of a sense of having to go chase after something that they already had. And that when they were exposed to messages around conditional worth, that they could default back to the sense of knowing at the end of the day, I'm actually loved for who I am.
Yeah, because I imagine like that equation of our worth. We talked about like our relationship to other people, feeling useful, feeling like we have a sense of purpose, feeling like we have a sense of meaning, and then also feeling like a sense of love and being held. Like these are sort of like spiritual, like cosmic ideas about ourselves. And in some ways, it could feel like you listen to this conversation, it could feel almost abstract, like. It's not like we're running around all day long, like changing our appearance and being like, I'm trying to get my worth. I'm trying to, but that's right. That's like the undercurrent of all of it, really, I guess.
Under so much of it, it is just like, can I be loved and belong? And that's because that's what's under all of it for all of us, all of the time. Am I going to be safe? Right? Am I going to be safe, but also am I going to be chosen? And we export that or kind of move the longing or those questions onto these really good attempts, I would say, like half-baked attempts at getting a sense of deep worth and value, but we get enough of it that keeps us going back to them, right? These are the things around conditional worth. Like we feel a little bit of the thing that we're after, and so we keep going after it, and yet it doesn't deeply land in us because it's not the thing that we were after in the first place. Or I think on some level, we know if we are getting value, but it's conditional, then it doesn't deeply satisfy us in the way that can put us at rest and help us feel like we can exhale into living our lives.
I can't imagine, like, even as you went through your research, that this is like an easy process in the sense of like, something, or I don't know if it is, but like something shuts off in you. And you mentioned the idea of seeing a truck ad or something and it not relating to you. So on one level that makes sense, but is there also a sense of like the old panic comes rushing in, like, and we start having doubts about our worth again, and this is really affecting me. And how would someone deal with that? Yeah.
I think that I'll use experiences from my own life because I think that it makes it feel less abstract and like a data finding and more like, oh, this has flesh and blood to it. This is like a human, this is a human being who knows what this is like. Thinking about coming out of eating disorder recovery, and I had anybody who's experienced diet culture probably knows this to some degree. Like, these are foods I don't let myself eat, and these are foods that are safe to eat. And so as part of the eating disorder world, there are, no-goes for any one person. And then, okay, these are the things that I've decided don't dysregulate me and they allow me to feed myself, but kind of stay within this framework. And I remember the time, it was probably 10 years after the last time I was in treatment, when I ate one of the foods that would have previously been on my no-go list. And I didn't even think about it. And it was just like a non-issue. And up until that point, there had been so many stages of, exposure and trying to regulate myself and having little bits of it. And it was like, all of a sudden, I'd lived my way into feeling like it was kind of a nothing, but it took so many steps along the way. And I just want to say, I want to give a time scale for that to remind ourselves and really open up space in the conversation that these things really can take time, and they will take effort and they will take support and they will take dedication and devotion to freeing yourself. And then there will be a time at which it feels like, wait, I can't believe that thing that I ate. That used to bother me. I didn't even think about it. In this particular instance, I remember it was a friend of mine who was like, this used to be one of your things that you would just like never, ever, ever have. How are you doing? And I didn't even realize it. It just wasn't coded as something in my nervous system as coming with any threat anymore. Mm-hmm. But that took like a lot of time and a lot of trust and safety building. The other side of it is I remember, I was well into being a psychologist at this point, and the pandemic happened, and again, well into my eating disorder recovery. And I remember at the beginning of the pandemic, I was walking through the grocery store, like preparing to have an episode of binge eating. I had my eating disorder when it presented was a mix of anorexia and bulimia. And so depending on what was going on for me, one would show up one way or the other. And I remember it just really hadn't been a part of my life. I wasn't symptomatic. And then the pandemic comes along and I'm in the grocery store and like, oh, who is shopping right now? Like, this is me from 10 years ago. I almost didn't recognize myself. And there was this judgment that came and then this fear that came. And I remember thinking to myself, okay, like I'm now aware of the thing that's happening. It's not unconscious anymore, but I need to do something different here for whatever happens next to shift. And in a very kind of uncharacteristic way, I sat down in the grocery store, I found a corner and I put my hands on my body. And I remembered that the eating disorder part of me comes out when I need someone to keep me safe. Like when I feel threatened or scared, when the feeling in my body of being out of control is too much, the eating disorder was a version of me that came in to help me feel safe. And I think that's the case for many of us around appearance management, that there's a preoccupation, almost like a drivenness, a fixation, an obsession, like just this is the way things are version of us that comes in and moves us into behaving in a certain way and managing in a certain way to take away everything that we feel that's scary inside. And what struck me as being different in that moment is as I sat down, I talked to that part of myself and I said to her, I know you must be really scared. I know you must be so scared of what's happening and how out of control you feel. And what I want you to know is that we have so many different ways of being with the scared feeling right now. Like, thank you for coming in to help me. Like, I can almost feel tearful as I think about it. It was so moving to say, I don't have to do it the way that I did it before. And I say that as a message of hope for anyone who feels like they're in the conflict and the tension of this double consciousness. Like, something in me wants to be free from this, and something in me is holding on because it's the only thing that I know how to do. And there is a way to let an inner voice of wisdom come to soothe the distress. Like, it might be someone else's voice. I mean, let it be my voice. If you don't have one of your own, if you don't have a parent or a best friend or a partner or an author or a therapist whose voice you can call on, like, let it be my voice or someone else's voice where you bring in something soothing to the distress and say to it, or let someone else say to it, this has been your only way of staying safe up until this point, but we can do it different this time.
That's so beautiful. I think that and powerful. I think the thing that's coming up for me is some of this work is like cognitive. We talked about reframing the way that we see death, reframing our self-worth, but then the challenge of that surveillance voice that's in your mind that's going on, and you have this like brilliant analogy in your book of how we often look at our bodies like a front porch, and then actually living inside the house. Can you talk about that analogy a little bit? And what would actually be required to like walk in the house?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Okay. So embodiment is this totally universal thing and totally foreign thing for many of us at the same time. Like, what does it mean to actually be embodied? I had to come up with this analogy that hopefully would be relatable to most of us. And the idea is that if we can think about our body not as a thing, but actually as a house, like a home that we get to live inside, that our consciousness gets to inhabit, instead of living inside the house, most of us are living on the front lawn. We're kind of sitting across the street like, oh, the shutters need to get painted. The roof's falling apart. Like the neighbor's house, they got a new paint job. Ooh, it's looking fresher than mine. That it's really easy when we're on the outside to default to comparison as a means of establishing worth. And so instead of thinking about, being inside the house as this way of living an embodied life, we move onto the front lawn and we objectify ourselves. We see our bodies as a thing to manage. There are all sorts of reasons why we leave the house, right? Imagine, just practically speaking, if you were living in a house where there was violence or terror, where there wasn't enough food to eat, where it was scary, where it was lonely, but everyone else was out on the front lawn. And that could be the way that you're like, I can connect with people. Like, oh, maybe someone will want to come into my house too if it looks good on the outside. Like, why is nobody in here? Why does it feel so lonely inside? Or I'm left to deal with this whole mess. That we leave our bodies for a reason. And that's a really important thing to validate and honor, and usually confront that when we're coming back into our bodies, it might require us to look at why we left in the first place. Illness, trauma, aloneness, emotion dysregulation, like being objectified by people, feeling unsafe in our body in some way. But to come back in at some point requires us to ask, am I living under the circumstances that I was when I left? Or is life different now? Do I have different tools? Do I have different attachments and connections? Do I just know different things about life than when I was 5, right? For boys, we see them often leave their bodies around 5. For girls, again, depending on a trauma history earlier, but around puberty is a really big time. Like what was happening that made me leave? And could it be that now that I'm all grown up, I get to decide the rules of the house? Sensation is a very powerful way to come back into the house. Things like what feels good. Like maybe, again, if we keep the analogy going, think about how welcoming it would be to go into a house where there's like a fire lit and the cider's on and, there's some music playing, there's full of laughter. Like those are houses that we want to be in. So what would it be like to create an inner life that felt rich with sensuality, pleasure, enjoyment, connection, safety, ease? Sometimes we get those things by how we think, but a lot of times we get those things through experience. Being with people that remind us, it can feel good to be me. Like, oh, this is the friend I can have the belly laugh with. And through connection, we remember our body can be a safe place to be.
Yeah. I mean, when you're speaking, it makes me think of, I have 2 nieces and, they're, 7 and 4, but the kind of reckless abandon in which a child would run around naked or whatever, and the freeness that they feel in their body. And at some point it's like, there's you mentioned for boys and then for girls, there's some point where we become aware, something cracks that picture. And at one point we were just so free in the way that we were living, somewhat, I guess, embodied for like a child. But then it forever shifts the way that we look at our body. Like these insecurities start to come in. We start feeling shame over our bodies, which never existed like when we were a child. And I think it's an interesting idea of like how do we recapture that type of freedom on the other side of it, because watching them run around is just like amazing. It's amazing. Like they just don't care.
Yeah.
Like they just don't care at all. And like, what would it look like as an adult to have that type of freedom that it feels like very few people listening to this might be experiencing right now? So yeah.
I mean, let me tell you, this is something I'm working really hard on staying connected to. And sometimes it means that I am really tolerating people's judgment. I was at a kid's birthday party recently, and there's, my daughter's playing with all her friends and they're all dancing, and me, right? Like moving my body, trying to do it the same way that they are and feeling like, okay, all the other adults are sitting on the outside watching in. But these experiences of seeing other people be free can be part of how we are liberated, especially if we allow ourselves to have those experiences too. So the research literature around body freedom would show that there's, this comes from Neva Paran's work. There's 3 primary things that we can look at. We can look at social freedom. So where are the places where we have social power and not in a conditional way? Who are the people where it feels like we just get to be us? And those might be people who we have actual intimate relationships with. Those could be people even in the media where just by virtue of how they are with their bodies, we go, oh, I can exhale. I can let my body be soft too. Or, oh, bodies that size or that age or that shape or that ability or with that disability, they belong. So we have the social piece. Then we have the mental piece, which means, can I begin to think critically and deconstruct the stories that inhibit my freedom? Am I aware of what's going on socially? And I'm on top of it. And I know when that ad comes to me that says like, do this, right? Just do this thing. You need to be doing this thing. If you really care about your body, you really need to be doing this thing. Like, okay, can I disengage? Can I be like, don't show me ads like that anymore? And can we, when we hear things in our social context, go, wait a second, no, I don't feel that way. Can I just offer a counter narrative where we push back? And then the third one, which is most powerful, I would say, because it lives in our bones, is when we have experiences of bodily freedom. When was the last time that you're like, did something that felt kind of wild? Like the more we become civilized, you could say, or like adult or mature, it's like we lose contact with experiences that feel like they, give us a little bit of that contact with our wildness, our unruliness, our animal body. Like there's a few friends of mine and I who regularly go skinny dipping, and the experience of being at the beach and just shrieking and laughing. And we're like, okay, it's dusk. Like, I guess someone might see us, but like lucky them, this is what midlife body looks like. And the experience of feeling like our heart is racing because we're doing something that is terrifying. Like, I want the experiences that kind of wake me back up into realizing my body is so full of sensation and joy and laughter. And to go after those experiences, again, it's almost like it redistributes the amount of attention that our brain is giving to appearance and gives it a new place to land. Like if you could imagine your attention as a kind of pie chart, and 100% of it, or let's say 70% of it goes to appearance management. If all of a sudden you start emphasizing things like free experience, your brain is going to start changing what it attributes attention to. And it's going to start looking into experiences, valuing experiences, seeking out experiences, remembering experiences, enjoying experiences.
Yeah, I really think that, the more I thought about this conversation and prepared for it, I really do feel like freedom is a big part of the value proposition of doing this on the other side of it not just being like a drudge, like, oh, we're aging, okay, we're just accepting that I'm not a sexual object anymore, but really on the other side, feeling a sense of, oh, God, I was like in a prison for so long, and it was so dark, and I just learned to adapt and survive in that way. And then you just like break outside the prison, and all of a sudden it's like light, and you can see the sun again. I think it's an interesting place to land the conversation, because so many people don't feel free right now. Yeah. And one of the areas of your research I thought was compelling is, what does it look like to be free from being a sexual object, like for a woman? Like if they were always looked at that way, and now they're not anymore. But that all being like a freedom thing, I felt that was like a counter-cultural thing.
Yeah. It might mean knowing my worth comes from so many other places, and I don't think it has to exclude us from being a sexual body, because I think there's a lot of women who are free from being sexually objectified, who feel deeply connected to their sexuality, but have reclaimed it as something that is about themselves and what they feel and what feels good inside of them, not dictated by the male gaze, by a culture of pornography or misogyny. But is there a way that I get to decide what feels good about my life? And could it be that pleasure, even if it's not for someone else or not used by someone else, even like enjoying a meal? Yeah. Right? There is so much power in saying that what feels good and creating a life that represents who I want to be in the world, that kind of allows us to push back on the very narrow narratives that do imprison us. Yeah. And your story about being imprisoned reminded me of something I was thinking about earlier, which is the panopticon. I don't know if you've heard about the panopticon at all, but the idea of the panopticon is that it was created by Jeremy Bentham as this perfect prison. And in the perfect prison, There's a circular structure to it where all of the prisoners are on the outside looking in towards a tower. And there's a singular tower on the center where there's a blinding light that looks at every single prisoner. In this construction of a prison, you only need one guard because everybody who is in the prison has no idea if they're being watched at any moment. So because they're not sure, is this going to be the moment where I'm seen? They begin to police themselves. And the idea of the surveillance of, at any moment, someone looking in on us is the thing that actually imprisons us. That prisoners become to police themselves, guard themselves, objectify themselves, such that they never rebel, they never challenge, they never break free. And the panopticon feels like the perfect description for what social media and our appearance management and kind of diet culture is doing to us in our bodies, that nobody even has to be looking for us to police ourselves. That when we are self-surveying, we are reinforcing this imprisonment of ourselves that really is only keeping us stuck and that we could get free from at any time.
You've said that invisibility could be a superpower. That's just like so radical.
Yeah.
Can you explain that?
Well, I think it's interesting to look at that as being a concept that aging women are themselves saying that when, like, I'm not at that place necessarily yet where I'm looking at myself in the social journey as being invisible in that regard. But aging women have said, I feel free from being preoccupied with image because culture has essentially discarded me. And now that I can't even win at the game if I tried, I realized I never wanted to play in the first place. And so superpower in the sense that it comes alongside the freedom to not care what other people think. That if we have been imprisoned by a preoccupation with what other people are thinking and their judgment and how we have to manage ourselves as a result, to not be cared about means that you get out, right? You get out of the system that was trapping you.
Well, Hillary, you've given language today and like a path, a different lens into this conversation that I feel like a lot of people desperately need and are trying to make sense of. And so thank you. I think your thoughts are incredible. I wanted to just like close with a final question, kind of turning back to the person who might have clicked into this, who feels very far from that new world, very far from these insights. So someone who's like drowning, scared of aging, believing her worth lives in how she looks. What would you want her to know about the road forward?
Before the road forward, I'd want to talk about the road that she'd been on and say, I'm so sorry that you were ever told that how you looked was what made you matter in the world. That was wrong. The way your body was used, the way your body was made to be an object, it wasn't okay. And it makes so much sense to me that you played along as a way to try to feel safe. And there is so much more for you as somebody who has lived through that journey and feels like I can see what it's like on the other side. I want you to know that it might be terrifying as hell to liberate yourself from what has been the only thing that's kept you safe. But there is a world of freedom that you could only imagine in which you are even more of who you really are. And the world needs you as who you really are.
Beautiful. Well, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. I love this conversation more than anything, and I could do it all day.
Thank you.